So that was, I think, already a perfect introduction, but very excited to be here this morning with you, Vanessa, and appreciate the conversation that we're going to be having. I think it's a topic that you're particularly passionate about, thinking purpose-driven marketing. And purpose-driven marketing may feel like an obvious topic to talk about when you work at the American Cancer Society, but I'm excited to hear some of your point of view about making also purpose-driven marketing relevant across all organizations. So thank you so much for joining us. Maybe you could just kick us off by defining purpose-driven marketing for those.
Absolutely. I'm going to make an assumption that most people, consume from brands that you love and that you're loyal to. But if you start to think about why you've selected certain brands to become part of your brand lifestyle, and you start to dissect a little bit what those brands are doing for you, other than bringing you a product or a service or delivering to your doorstep something that really matters to your life or to your family, there may be something a little bit deeper there. There might be a connection that you feel to that brand specifically, right? And if you think about purpose marketing, of course it's a marketing strategy, so let's not get it twisted. There's still, at the end of the day, some form of transaction, but purpose-driven marketing is far beyond the transaction. It's actually building that intentional relationship with that consumer. So going to the core of a company's values, what they stand for, other than, again, just the transaction, just selling a product or a service, what they stand for as individuals of those companies, as a company pillar within the society, and also what causes they're actually associating themselves with. And so again, if I ask you, what's your favorite brand, and you start digging a little bit more about why you love that brand so much, I suspect that there's perhaps something about that brand that has connected to you, at your core. Perhaps there's something within that company that you see within yourself, a value. Perhaps they stand for diversity. Perhaps they're environmentalists, right? If you think about Patagonia, who here knows anything about Patagonia? Awesome. And so if you know them and if you bought their products, you know that their products last forever, right? And they're sincere about those products lasting forever, not because they're eager to sell you the next jacket or the next pair of boots, but really because they stand for environmental causes. And they're not just selling you the products, they're telling you that product's going to last forever because I want you not to have to consume so much. So it's far more than just marketing using environmental causes in their campaigns. It's also at the root cause or at the root of how they produce the products and how they distribute them. And therefore, you're hooked. You understand that matters to them. And so you may pay a premium even because you know the product will be good, and you also know that they're doing good with some of their revenue. In fact, quick story, they're actually donating every year over $100 million to environmental causes. It's not something they tout readily, but people who are hooked to that brand actually know a little bit of this. So.
When a brand is thinking about building a purpose-driven marketing strategy, what are some of the key elements that they should be thinking about and considering? The Patagonia example is a great one, but generally speaking, what sorts of elements should they be thinking about?
Well, anybody who's leading a brand or marketing for a brand knows that at the core, you have to have a purpose. What's your mission? What's your vision? What's beyond just the TV campaigns or the social media presence? What are your real objectives as a corporate citizen? And so articulate that, right? I think I talk about this with people who are just doing startups. We work a lot at the American Cancer Society with startups who are mostly researchers who are starting up and trying to get grants so that they can continue to help the mission of ending cancer as we know it for everyone. And so when we talk to them about building their companies, we tell them, well, what is at the core? Well, we want to do research. Yes, but go beyond that. What part of society are you trying to go and fix? What is your role in, as a company, what is your role to help those solutions that you're working towards? And so know what your brand purpose is, articulate it, have a vision, have a mission. And then the other thing is walk the talk, right? A lot of companies claim to have this really beautifully articulated, they paid millions of dollars to agencies to create these brand purpose statements or these brand vision statements. But then if you dig a little bit and you start to think about what about their HR policies? They claim to be all about diversity. They claim to be really, involved with education, But are they paying back employees who are going to school? Are they putting together HR policies that are actually going to support same-sex couples, for example? And so walk the talk. Make sure that the purpose is not just on paper, but it's actually how you build your company's culture, how people make decisions, how people behave as employees of your company. Another thing I think is test your messaging, right? I think that if you have some kind of, association to a cause and you want to make sure that it's going to feel authentic, then put it in front of your loyal customers and find out if they actually feel that that message coming from you is right. A lot of people during the Black Lives Matter movement wanted to do a lot of great things, right? And so everybody seemed to have jumped on that train. But then if you started to think about what that company actually stood for, they had good intentions, but there was nothing else within their company that sincerely did anything for African American culture and even employees. And so thinking about making sure that it's authentic is so important, and sometimes testing is the best way to know if that message is gonna actually resonate with your audiences. The other thing I would say, and that's not just because I'm at the American Cancer Society, but it is, join a cause, right? Have your company partner with an organization or a program that's actually doing something meaningful in the space. And there is a plethora of nonprofits nowadays. So many different, really intentional organizations who spend their every dollar, their every activity to do something good that absolutely resonates with your audiences, and therefore, if it aligns properly and intentionally with your purpose, could become really a good marketing opportunity. So at the American Cancer Society, we partner with a lot of great brands, and we're very fortunate. I actually just got back from a meeting with the NFL. Well, the NFL obviously have a really strong fan base, and it's all about football. Nobody wants to be talking about cancer, right? Everybody wants to be talking about the Dallas Cowboys. But the reality is that every fan and really every player and every coach has had some level of interaction with cancer. I mean, cancer is really the new lifestyle brand if you think about it. Every one of you have been touched some way, I guarantee it. And so partnering with an organization like the NFL, who have a huge platform and who have been very vocal about wanting to do good out there, makes a lot of sense for them. It's good business for them, right? People have all kinds of feelings about the NFL when it comes to politics, but if you ask about, what do you think about the NFL and what they're doing in cancer, we know it from the data. Consumers are really enlightened to know that the company that's spending billions of dollars with athletes and media are also spending a lot of their money giving back to a cause like the American Cancer Society. So those are just a couple of things. The first and most important one is know your purpose as an organization and be authentic in that.
It's actually a really good segue to have you share your recent conversation with the NFL and the work that you're doing together. It's obvious when we think about the American Cancer Society, maybe even a partnership with the NFL, right, around purpose-driven marketing, but why do companies that maybe are not so obviously connected to this idea of purpose-driven marketing care about it, or why should they? So I know those are kind of two different questions, but I'd love to just kind of hear your point of view about why it's important and relevant to every single one of us in the room.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is now we live in an age where there are so many competing brands. I mean, and not just that, there's so many different marketing messages out there. And so every brand is trying to break through, and every brand is trying to be the best or get the biggest share of the market. And so, quite frankly, purpose-driven marketing is just good business because consumers, like all of you in the room, like all of us, are making conscious decisions and unconscious decisions every day about the brands that we're choosing. And so that's like reason number one. It is good for the bottom line to be a purpose-driven marketer. And then the other piece is employees. If you think about the evolution of the people departments and the HR departments and just how difficult it's become to maintain, to retain, to hire, to create loyalty with employees. Data shows that employees who work for organizations who have a strong sense of their purpose and who walk the talk, who have a strong culture, retain their employees. And so those are, I think, two really good reasons, because the bottom line and your people sticking around is a pretty good business.
You're a marketing strategist, you're a subject matter expert in integrative marketing strategies. So when you think about the things a brand can do to align their messaging with this purpose-driven marketing sort of, lens, do you have any particular other, stories or ideas or suggestions that you would offer to a brand generally?
Well, I think that, are there any organizations here from nonprofits? Just curious. Oh, good. Okay, my peers are in the room. Perfect. So one thing from the nonprofit perspective, when we're approaching conversations with corporations, with brands, that we're always really intentional about is making sure that we understand their business objectives. So I would say that for an organization who's seeking to connect with some form of either a nonprofit like the American Cancer Society or just a cause, it could be a message, that you, again, make sure that it's authentic to your purpose, make sure that it resonates with your audiences and with your employees. But I would say to really create messaging that at the end of the day feels real. So if you think about Dove, for example, Dove sells soap. We all know Dove sells soap. The whole world knows. And yet they have redefined the standards of beauty. They've created campaign after campaign where they've been able to create this global conversation about how women feel versus how they look versus how they feel judged. And if you think about that, is it good for their business? Is it selling more soap? Absolutely. It really has. But it's also done something good in the world. And so when you're starting to consider, should we partner with a nonprofit? Should we align ourselves with a message, with some kind of social issue? Make certain that it's something where you feel that your company can actually add value. I think that that's the most important thing. Being at the American Cancer Society, shameless plug, it's very easy to add value if you're continuing to invest in research. A lot of things that people don't know about the ACS is that we also provide care for people who are undergoing cancer treatments. We have Hope Lodges. We have one here, actually. Jerry Jones and his beautiful wife have actually flipped the bill and bought us a beautiful building right by Baylor and by the cancer healthcare system. So that's like another way for people to connect, for brands to be able to connect. So we have a great partnership with Sleep Number because they don't know about cancer research and whether or not as an organization that aligns with their company, but we do know and they know that good sleep is good for your health. And if you're healthy, you're more than likely to have better health outcomes. And so that's a different kind of way to plug into a nonprofit or to a social cause that feels true to what you're doing as an organization. So rather than just, put the rainbow flag during Pride Month in your social media channels, think a little bit about maybe the LGBTQ plus community and the suicide rate with teens and whether or not you're actually hiring these people, right? That's real social, good corporate citizenship is actually doing something, not just telling the stories of it. So that's way long-winded, but that's another level of making certain that you're not just aligning yourself with an organization and talking about your purpose, but that you're actually doing something good in the world.
Reminds me of one of the things we talked about last week when we first connected, and that is the power of inclusivity, right? And I know it's a topic you're super passionate about. With an organization like the American Cancer Society, like you said at the beginning, all of us have been touched by cancer, so that messaging is relevant, right, in some way or capacity to most of us. But there are other nonprofit organizations or brands generally that need to be thinking about inclusivity. Your Dove example is a great one. Can you share a little bit more about your point of view there?
Well, I think, there's a lot of discussion around DEI, and right now it's even being politicized, which is quite unfortunate. That's my opinion. And there's the pros and cons of DEI departments, and there's a lot of chatter around it. But the reality is that our audiences, our consumers, the consumers of your brands, even of your nonprofit messaging, are diverse, right? Look at this room today. Look how diverse we are. And so, I'm not teaching anyone. Diversity is discussed in so many different platforms in so many different ways. But the reality is there were years where diversity became almost like a check the box, right? And so inclusivity meant I have a Black person, I have a woman, I have a person of a certain age. And it wasn't really intentional. And if you look back at TV spots of about 10 years ago, you'll quickly pick that up, right? Inclusion means, and this is where inclusion is different than diversity. Inclusion means just representing people as they are. And so I would say that for brands who want to seem inclusive, know who your audiences are, understand them, understand how they want to be communicated to, how they speak, who they idolize, who they aspire to become, who are their mentors, and then if it's authentic to your brand, then lean into that in your marketing and communications. I'll give you, a really real-time example. This was a bit of a Debbie Downer, but it's important because I see there's wonderful Black men in the room, and this is my American Cancer Society shameless plug. But we look at our data and we look at who we serve at ACS with our marketing messaging, obviously, like you all do. And we know from research that African American men are dying completely disproportionately to their male counterparts in prostate cancer, which, by the way, prostate cancer is a 98.4% curable cancer. So if you think about it, well, what's the difference, right? And so as marketers, we dig a little deeper. So the science tells us about the mortality rate. What's the marketing telling us? Well, how are people behaving in different communities where they're getting screened sooner or later? And if they're getting screened too late and therefore there's mortality, what is not happening? What conversation is not happening? And so we can use our marketing vehicle to target African American individuals, men and their wives, who are helping them make the decision to go get screened early. But it's like, I'm a white girl. How am I going to be influencing, right, through my marketing messaging if I don't ask African American men how they want to be spoken to? And so by doing that, by leaning in, we realize, wait a minute, they're actually not even talking about health in general. It's not something that's discussed it's just a cultural norm that we don't talk about that. We didn't talk about it with our parents. Our parents didn't tell us about their health problems. And so, there's the nugget. There's the marketing opportunity of being inclusive. We want to help everyone on their cancer journey. But how can we help everyone if there's a fraction of that population who's tuned out? Right? We're not being inclusive. We're putting all these I love you, get screened campaigns out there, but there's a whole population who's at risk, who's tuning us out. And so now being inclusive means we're leaning into that population. We're finding out who are the individuals who they respect, who've had their own cancer journeys, and how might we use their stories to, have the best KPI of them all, which is to save more lives.
So it's a great example, and you've already touched on some element of this question, but when a brand is thinking about inclusivity and thinking about aligning an audience building strategy, right, with inclusivity in mind, what are some additional things that a brand can be thinking about? Like, what are some of the elements of their brand strategy? You have a career that we touched on it. You've worked on rebuilding brands across many well-known Dallas-based companies like AT&T and Southwest Airlines, and even recently American Cancer Society. And I think about audience building as an element sometimes of rebranding and vice versa. So I know that's a little bit of a broad question, but you have lots to share.
Well, I think it's great because I think that's the power of inclusivity, is being able to continue to broaden your audiences, right? And so you may know your audience today, and you may have created loyalty, and you may even know what social causes matter to them, and you may know how they want to be represented in your marketing materials, but also you want to grow, right? And so how do you continue to push beyond the audiences that you know? Well, you have to study those individuals that you're wanting to go out and reach. And so I think that that's definitely important in organizations, that you mentioned Southwest Airlines, who undergo like very expensive and huge endeavors such as rebranding, have that in mind. Their growth potential, and that growth potential includes people who you've not necessarily served before. And if you haven't served them, what is it about them that you don't know? Go find out. And then, turn that into storytelling that actually appeals to them. So I think that brand strategy, being inclusive, those two things now have to be completely synonymous. Like, you have to be inclusive to have a proper brand strategy.
Absolutely. And then thinking about call to action, and then maybe we can open it up to some questions in the audience. But call to action, like what can a brand be doing now if they haven't been thinking about purpose-driven marketing, inclusivity, DEI? Like, what can they do?
Yeah. So a lot of companies that we go to solicit support, often they'll say, well, we don't have the money, we don't have the means, which is absolutely fair. Small company or a company that's completely being restructured or having a poor year, 2 bad quarters in a row, absolutely we understand. I say, like, my call to action is be thinking about what value you can provide to a cause. And that doesn't necessarily turn into how much money you need to be spending with a nonprofit, right? Dove was going to have a marketing campaign regardless. They were going to try to sell soap regardless. And if you look at what they've done, I mean, it's a natural one to pick. They don't even feature their products at all in their campaigns anymore. They don't have to. The power of that brand marketing and that alignment with an important social cause, which is what, which has transformed the dialogue globally, that matters. And then at a smaller scale, if you think about, a company who is producing materials. I like the story of Tom's. It's a dated story, but they're still doing great things. And they were a tiny startup, and they were making canvas shoes, and they didn't have a lot of money, and they weren't going to. And they had this novel idea that they wanted to save the world from poverty, and they didn't have a lot of money to throw at it. But what they could do is create an extra product. So every time they sell one, they give one, and they've continued. They've maintained that. They're doing that for decades now. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be extremely costly for your brand to lean into purpose-driven marketing. Now, of course, I'm at the American Cancer Society, and I will gladly take a check from you so that we can get more African-American men screened, right? For everyone in the room, tell someone that you love, go get screened, it super matters. But even just that, like even me just making that plea, being in rooms with people and reminding people, please tell your loved ones to get screened. And then you turn around and you put that in your communication. Oh, I was at Brand Innovators and there was this lady from the American Cancer Society. I'm going to send a newsletter to my whole company. You've already done something for us. You've already done something for the cause and for your employees, and it's authentic. That's already a start. So that's like my call to action. Start right where you are now. Make sure you understand your purpose. Feel good that your company is actually walking the talk, that it's authentic, and then lean into, well, what social causes really align with our values and with our consumers' values, and how do we turn that idea into an action? And that could be by aligning with an organization like the American Cancer Society and creating co-branded marketing campaigns together, but it could also be something very small. So.
I love that. I like thinking about authenticity is not just sort of having integrity or telling the truth, but it's taking action, being transparent. So it's a really good call out. So what's going on with the American Cancer Society? What's happening in 2024, and where is most of your mind share in a day-to-day?
Yeah. I love my job. First of all, I work for the most dynamic female CEO, Dr. Karen Knudsen. She is the first female CEO, but she will say, I'm the first cancer researcher CEO of the American Cancer Society. That matters even more to her. And she has an incredible strategy where she's, put together the organization in a way, even with the way we're structured, so that we are aligned with providing research, which is something everybody knows. The American Cancer Society is 110 years old. Everybody knows that we've been doing a ton in the cancer research place. But also the biggest pillar that's the least known is the American Cancer Society CAN, ACS CAN, which is our advocacy arm. And so we work across all states and obviously in Washington, and we're continuously advocating for healthcare reform. And at the state level, you can imagine that that's really challenging. And so how do we make sure that that screening is covered? How do we make sure that the secondary screening to that mammogram, that when they tell you all of a sudden, ladies, that, oh, wait a minute, we need a 3D but that one's not covered. Like, well, if the doctor says I need a 3D mammogram, then that should be covered. Like, we're advocating for things like that. But we're also advocating for the fact that depending on where you live, you could be walking 3 blocks over and the mortality rate can increase by 30%. So there is a huge opportunity to be able to identify the zip codes where people are not getting screened, and even when they do get the cancer diagnosis, are not completing their treatments. So our third pillar is patient support, which is really how do we make sure people get to their treatments. First of all, that they get the treatments they need. So we have patient navigators. They're volunteers across all the cancer centers nationwide who actually will tell you, like, oh, so you don't have anyone to drive you to your cancer treatments? You don't know where to stay when you're at your cancer treatments? The American Cancer Society is going to help you with that. Oh, you don't even know what to ask? Oh, you're scared in the middle of the night? The American Cancer Society is going to be here for you. We have our 24-hour hotline. The most calls we get are in the middle of the night, because if you have a cancer diagnosis or if you're a caregiver, that's the other piece that we worry about all the time is the caregivers. Your cancer outcomes highly depend on how much care you have within your family or within your village. And that's also not something that people discuss, right? And so that's a long-winded way, but the American Cancer Society is very busy, just as you all are, and we're really busy at making certain that everybody gets the fair treatment, equitable treatment, and that they can survive and thrive after cancer.
Amazing. Well, so grateful to you for taking your career expertise really from AT&T and Southwest Airlines and bringing it to an organization like the American Cancer Society and to all of us this morning too. We might have time for one quick question.
We know in the next month we're going to see a splattering of LGBTQ positivity across brands, but how, especially with larger corporations, do you recommend someone maybe saying, you have ERGs that are great for us, but then on the other hand, you are maybe making donations to the opposite causes or political leaders? How do you recommend that conversation?
Yeah, that's really difficult, and the political conversation is so supercharged here in this nation. I should say I'm from Canada, and I've been here 17 years, and I still don't understand the bipartisanship, which is how we just can't talk about topics that shouldn't have anything to do with politics, right? It's just being a good human being and treating people like they want to be treated. That's a very challenging thing, because the thing about it is, and coming from AT&T, my colleagues wouldn't mind me saying this, and I loved my time there, an extraordinary organization. But what's good for a company isn't necessarily always good for a person. But then if it's good for the company, it's probably good for the person's employment. And so you've got to be able to rationalize things and not turn them into personal things, which is really difficult when you're thinking about the LGBTQ plus cause, because that is a very personal thing. And so I'm not saying that you should turn a blind eye to what political affiliations or which organizations a company is invested in. But if you're focused on that, then go a little deeper, I think, as an employee, and go find out the why. The why might not be, the why might take a little bit of the pain away. So you might be leaning to the right because there are certain policies that will facilitate the way you operate your organization, therefore you can keep all your employees on staff. But that point of view also comes with the risk of, well, some of those employees feel really attacked by that side, right? Which, depending on your politics, right? I'm Canadian. I completely lost it. But then, if you feel that strongly about it, go a little deeper with the leaders at your organization and say, okay, but what are we doing to counterbalance that? How are we then making sure that our HR policies are really sound for individuals who need, same-sex couple insurance? And, how difficult is it? Do you have to be married for 5 years, whereas, this girl's shacking with this guy and he already has the benefits, right? Like, those are the things that maybe you need to pry a little bit deeper about. It's a great, complicated question. I'm here afterwards. We can continue to talk about it.
I love it. Again, it circles back to your point of view on authenticity and engage. So you're saying engage, ask questions, go deep. Don't just decide something is one way and call it a day. Well, thank you so much for being here today.